Greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. It's a cold but sunny day here in central New York, and it's an opportunity for us to talk baseball and baseball books, our virtual author series. We will be talking to Bryan Hoch, longtime Yankee beat writer, who has written a terrific new book, The Bronx Zoom, just nominated for a prestigious award. We'll talk more about that in just a couple of moments. We do want to thank the Ford Motor Company for their generous support of this program and all the other virtual programs that we do. We do virtual voices of the game, legends of the game, curator spotlights, programs featured in our education department as well. And of course, the virtual author series is very much part of our educational focus as well. So we thank the Ford Motor Company for making it possible for us to do this. Our guest today is Bryan Hoch. Bryan has covered New York baseball for the past 2 decades. He has been MLB.com's Yankee beat reporter since 2007. A lot of you may have seen him making appearances on the MLB network. Also found these interesting tidbits out about Bryan. He is a 2-time New York City marathon finisher, which is impressive. And this one kind of interesting. His wife, Connie, once danced on stage with Bruce Springsteen. That's all the information I have on that. But with that, we welcome Bryan to the program. Bryan, thanks for being with us. How are you?
Absolutely. Great. What an intro. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for having me.
So tell us about this Springsteen thing. What do we need to know there?
Oh, it's fantastic. She got to do the Courtney Cox Dancing in the Dark role there. We were at a show in Newark probably about 5 years ago. She was pregnant with our first daughter, and she brought a sign that said, her bucket list was just married, pregnant with first kid, and the last box unchecked was dance with Bruce. And Bruce saw that sign and called her on stage, and a really cool moment there. And so my job was to document it with my iPhone and make sure I caught every second of that.
That's great. That's great. We're going to talk a lot more about baseball and probably not nearly as much about Bruce Springsteen the rest of the way. The book is The Bronx Zoom, Inside the New York Yankees' Most Bizarre Season. You can purchase it, of course, at Amazon, but you can also go to Bryan's website, which we encourage you to do. That's www.bryan-hoch.com. And you'll notice that Bryan is spelled with a Y. Hoch is H-O-C-H, bryanhoch.com. There you can learn more about the book and, of course, purchase it as well. Something that just came down last week, and it's kind of funny. We were talking about this off air a moment ago. Bryan was actually not aware of this, but last week, officially November 17th, the 2021 Casey Award finalists were announced. This is something, it's a prestigious baseball book award. It's given out by Spitball, literary baseball magazine, which has been around for 40 years now. Well, Bryan's book, The Bronx Zoom, has been nominated for the Casey Award. It is one of 9 books that have been nominated. And I guess we're proud to say that we now, with Bryan on our ledger here, we have now interviewed 6 of these authors, the others being Joe Posnanski, Dave Parker and Dave Jordan, who worked on the Dave Parker biography, Steve Treader, who did the life of Horace Stoneham, Dan Taylor did the book on the Hollywood Stars, and Luke Epplin wrote Our Team, the epic story of 4 men in the World Series that changed baseball. Bryan, you were caught by surprise.
I was.
Spitball has not yet contacted you about this.
And no, we were having a chat right before we went on air, and this is the first I've heard of it. So 9 books, that's a heck of a lineup right there. I'm proud to be in it. Like they always say at the Oscars or the Emmys, it's an honor just to be nominated. So very impressive lineup there. I was definitely shocked, and I'm humbled and honored to be a part of that group.
In writing books, and it's an area where I do have a little bit of experience in, it's probably the last thing that's on the author's mind is getting an award. You want to just finish the book. You want to do at least a decent, if not better job. You want it to be factually accurate. You want to include everything that you feel is pertinent. An award, I mean, it's not something you're even thinking about at that point.
No, it wasn't for me until about 2 minutes ago. So, Bronx Zoom is a book that I'm very proud of. It covers a historic time in baseball. I feel like we're never going to see another season like 2020, hopefully. But just in terms of being on the ground with the Yankees, covering that, when everything shut down in March and the twists and turns that it took through that season, I definitely felt there was enough of a story there, a thread line to tell a compelling tale about what it took to get through the season and the challenges that the Yankees and Major League Baseball and really the world faced in 2020. So there was a lot that went into that book, but I can't honestly say that winning an award was at the top of my mind when I kind of was spending all those nights and days interviewing people and digging through news clips and really just putting this book together.
We should mention this is Bryan's third book. The first one was Mission 27, which explores the World Series victory, the last one for the Yankees. That was co-written with Mark Feinsand, who is a man who has written a lot about baseball for the Yankees. I believe he's the Red Sox beat writer, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Bryan?
Mark Feinsand is our national beat writer now for MLB.com, but he was on the Yankee beat in 2009 with me. I was there for MLB.com, and he was there for the New York Daily News. So we were actually competitors in 2009. And so what we did was 10 years later, we went and revisited the World Series championship. So that book came out in 2019. And that was a ton of fun it was kind of like a high school reunion in a lot of ways, tracking down the members of a team we both covered and, kind of getting their takes on that special season. Because at the time, we didn't know that was going to be the last time the Core Four ever won a World Series, or you figured the Yankees had this brand new ballpark, they're opening it up, and they're going to win World Series in 2010 and 2011 and 2012, and it just didn't happen that way. And so for guys like Derek Jeter and Mariano Rivera, it was the last time they would ever hold the World Series trophy. And for guys like Alex Rodriguez, for example, it's the only time they would hold the World Series trophy. So in the moment, I feel like we didn't fully appreciate how special the story of 2009 was. So getting to go back into it 10 years later, that was a ton of fun for both of us.
Bryan's also written the Baby Bombers. That was a work that he did as a solo effort with a foreword by Mark Teixeira. But book number 3, the award finalists, and very much influenced, at least in terms of the title, which I love. We're talking about a book that came out in the late 1970s. It was a very controversial book at the time. The Bronx Zoo, written by Sparky Lyle, along with veteran baseball writer Peter Golenbach. So obviously your book, the title influenced by that title. I was going to ask you if this was your idea or the publishers, and you were telling me neither.
No, this is the credit for this one has to go to my wife, Connie. She had that brainstorm, and we were driving around and kicking around ideas. It's like, how do we sum up what 2020 was? And this was still in August, I believe, while the season was still going on. And we were kicking around different ideas about what was happening in the world with the pandemic and this strange shortened season that we were experiencing. And she added one M to that great book title from Sparky Lyle and Peter Golenbach, which I read. I remember reading that book as a kid, and I loved it. It was kind of one of my first peeks behind the curtain into what ball players were really like off the field. So that book holds a special place in my heart. And you add one letter there, and it becomes a perfect book about 2020 and the New York Yankees. And so all the credit to my wife, Connie, who is much smarter than I am and came up with a terrific title.
Lyle and Golenbach certainly had their style, and some might call it sensationalist in some ways. It was very much behind the scenes. It had some pretty shocking stuff, at least for that time period. Wouldn't be shocking now. Many books that have come out, baseball books behind the scenes, a lot more revelatory, a lot more shocking since then. But for its time period, I mean, it was, I think, even more exposing, if you will, than something like Ball Four. And it was a
Right.
highly successful book. Tell us about your writing style and how it's different from Lyle and Goldenbach and their venture.
Yeah, well, I certainly would think that those were kind of revealing behind the curtain that, oh my gosh, ball players actually go out at night and drink beer. And that was earth-shattering stuff at that time period, especially, with Jim Bouton telling his stories in Ball Four, and then Sparky Lyle kind of peeking behind the curtain on that wild 1978 Yankee season. And my writing style here, I guess it's kind of in that realm, in that what I'm trying to capture in 2020 is the craziness of everything that the ball players, the front office members, the media were experiencing going through that 2020 season. So it's obviously a lot different than the 1978 New York Yankees, who were fighting in the clubhouse, and obviously the Bucky Dent home run, the historic thing. The Yankees don't win the World Series at the end of my book. They do at the end of Sparky Lyle's book, but there was so much to cover with what was happening in the world. I think that, obviously I've covered the Yankees since 2007. 2020 was probably the first year and the year where the real world leaked into the clubhouse more than any other time. A lot of times you don't let politics come in there. You don't let what's happening in the world. But there was so much going on. You had protests happening in this country. You had a presidential election that was wildly contentious. We obviously had the COVID virus, which was ravaging cities, especially New York City, which was very hard hit at the beginning of the pandemic. So to have a book that focused on the New York Yankees and what it took to pull off a baseball season, albeit a shortened one with no fans in the stands, it was the most bizarre season in Yankees history. I feel confident in that. You see that there on the cover. There's no season that was ever like 2020. Fortunately, we were able to have a full 2021 season, but the fans came back, and it felt a lot more normal. So nothing, I hope, will ever be like 2020.
Was it easy to promote this idea to a publisher?
I think that not knowing if the Yankees would win the World Series or not was probably the biggest hang-up, because I was pitching this book right when summer camp got started. If you remember, the baseball restarted in July, and they sent all the teams back to their home ballparks, and just kind of the staggering fight that was ahead to be able to pull this off. And I remember thinking, even if they can find a way to do this, 60 games, and you remember there were a lot of times where the season looked like the plug was going to be pulled, especially early. You had entire teams with COVID breakouts, and remember, this is a time where the vaccine does not exist, so it's a lot more dangerous at that time than it was, and it felt like everything was on pins and needles. You didn't know if what was going to come around the corner the next day, and so if somehow MLB, the Yankees, and this sport were able to pull off this season, I thought that there was definitely a story to tell here in just the trials and tribulations that a team would go through. And there's a chapter in the book here, a period where the Yankees literally do not know who they're going to play the next day, because the Phillies have been exposed to the Marlins, so they're stranded in their hotel in Philadelphia. And somebody comes up with a bright idea and says, well, why don't we just drive to Baltimore and play against the Orioles? It's kind of like pickup baseball back when we were kids. And, hey, there's a team down the street who wants to play ball. Let's go do that. That never happened before in Major League Baseball. And so there were so many things like that I feel like the further removed we are from just trying to keep our head above water in 2020, now you look back and it's like, oh, my gosh, I can't believe they actually were able to get that done.
Let's go through this season step by step. Let's start with spring training 2020. Spring training is shut down by Major League Baseball March 12th. Basically, the players are told to essentially leave camp, no more spring training games. Initially, as I recall, Major League Baseball announced that it would be about a 2-week delay. It wouldn't take that long. Did you believe that, Brian, or did you think, no, this is going to be more of a long-term problem?
I remember thinking, I was there. I was with the Yankees in Tampa on March 12 when things shut down. And the Yankees actually initially took a vote that they wanted to stay in Tampa because they figured this is going to be 2 or 3 weeks. Let's keep taking batting practice. Let's keep the pitchers going, because when the season starts, whether it's April 10 or April 15, they want to be sharp. They thought it could be a competitive advantage. So they took a vote on that. And so that kind of speaks to how little we understood what was happening in real time there. Because, I did believe that we would get started, but it would be a late start, say like April 15 or so. And then as the next few days went on there and days turned into weeks, you started to see some of the players scattering and realizing we're not getting started here on April 15. That's not going to happen. But I remember going out to dinner with John Sterling, the Yankees broadcaster, probably about 3 or 4 days before everything shut down on March 12th. And you remember you had Rudy Gobert in the NBA, and the NBA stopped playing, and there was so much that happened there. Tom Hanks announced that he had COVID, and it felt like everything was just stopping. But about 4 days before that, John and I were out to dinner with a few other people, and I remember him asking me, "What do you think about this coronavirus thing?" And at that time, we had no idea. I thought it was going to be something like the flu, and I thought, just wash your hands and be careful, you'll be okay. And I had no idea that it was something that could shut down a baseball season. So we all lived this in real time, kind of trying to scramble and figure out what was going on in the world.
As this delay continued into late April, early May, at what point did you leave Florida and head home?
I stayed in Florida because I figured that when baseball restarted, if it restarted, that it would restart in Florida. So I stayed in Tampa for as long as I could. I know that once Aaron Boone drove north, and some of the other players drove north. Remember, the Yankees also had a COVID outbreak there, which was kind of the first sign to the players that maybe it's not the smartest thing to hang around. They had a couple of cases at their minor league complex, and that was the first real connection. And I remember, Brian Cashman said at the time something that was very prescient. He said that I think that all of us, no matter what our walk of life, we're going to know somebody who has this thing. So you remember at the time, we're talking dozens, hundreds of people in the country had it. Obviously now hundreds of thousands have had it, but at the time in its infancy there, the world was changing in real time. And so I figured that baseball would restart because spring training also always happens in Florida. And there was talk about that. The Yankees wanted that to happen. They liked their complex here. They had more fields that they could work out on rather than Yankee Stadium, which was not really equipped for a spring training atmosphere. They've only got the one diamond at Yankee Stadium. Here, in Tampa, they have bullpens and many practice fields. So that seemed like what it was going to happen. But then when cases started exploding in Florida in June, that's when everybody kind of looked up and said, this is not going to work. We're going to have to go back to New York.
Did at any point you change your mind and say, yes, we're not going to have a season. 2020 just will not be?
I was doubtful there at certain periods, especially when there was a lot of fighting back and forth between baseball and the Players Association, and something that I think we're going to probably see in the next few weeks as well. But, it was contentious. And when the discussion revolved around money and not around the safety of the players, that's when I started to have doubts come into my mind. But, the one thing is that the commissioner's office was always able to unilaterally impose a season just based on the agreement that they already had. So they were able to do that 60-game season. Could they have done 72 or 81 if they had moved a little faster? I think they could have. But at that point, I thought it was a huge victory to just get 60 in the books and actually get these guys back on the field, even doing it in an empty ballpark, which was absolutely strange and bizarre. I was one of the 35 media members who was allowed every day to go to these ball games, and to walk into an empty, vacant Yankee Stadium that felt like it was post-apocalyptic. It was the strangest thing ever. You'd walk in at 7 o'clock and the lights would be on and the Yankees would be on the field in their pinstripes, and there's just nobody there. And you look around and you think, who are they playing this game for? But you had to remember that there was an audience at home, and that people were, still on lockdown. People were still staying in their homes at that time. I mean, we were still bleaching groceries at that time. It was just I think that we definitely needed a diversion, and baseball provided that.
So the 60-game season begins in late July. You just mentioned that you were one of, 35 reporters allowed to be at Yankee Stadium. How did Major League Baseball determine which members of the media could be at the park and which could not?
Yeah, I think it was, the Yankees, certainly I can speak for them because they accommodated their beat reporters, and I'm one of, I believe, 11 of those. So we were there every single day. I was covering for Yankees.com and MLB.com. And so I was there every day that I could be. I felt like that was important. And then the one thing I do want to mention is that at that time, MLB was very good with us about safety. And if we were concerned about our personal health, or anything else going on, they gave us the option of working from home because, and all these interviews were taking place on Zoom. You could do that, but I felt that, being a reporter, I felt like it's our responsibility to be the eyes and ears of our readers and to serve them best. I felt that if we were allowed in Yankee Stadium or any of the other ballparks that the Yankees went to, it was my responsibility to be there and not to just watch it on television. And so I think there's no substitute for covering an event in person. And the one thing I would mention here is that from a personal perspective, that was very challenging for me because I have two young daughters. They were 4 and 2 at the time. And we just weren't comfortable with me being exposed and then coming home. So I had to quarantine separately from them and cover that entire season, living separately and just FaceTiming with the kids and doing little drive-bys, but I wouldn't go in the house. And so that was definitely a personal challenge from July and through the end of the postseason in October. But, fortunately, we'll hopefully never see a season like it again.
Yeah, that must have been brutally difficult to be away from your family for months, especially with young children as well. So the season starts late July. You can go to the games at Yankee Stadium. Where in the ballpark could you go? Where could you not go?
We had access only to the 200 level at Yankee Stadium, which is where the press box is. And you could walk a little bit around the ring. That's the second deck at Yankee Stadium, but we could not go down to the 100 level, the field access there. Obviously, we couldn't go in the clubhouses or the press conference room or anything down there in the basement area. So that was all off limits. So they gave us special badges, and you got a badge every day that said Tier 2 personnel, and you were able to come in and you could watch the game from the press box, and there was a lot of distance. It was taped off and roped off. So you didn't come into contact with anyone. There was no food service at the ballpark. The only thing they put out for us was bottles of Poland Spring water, and that was it. You had all the water you could drink, but otherwise there was nothing happening there at the ballpark. Like I said, it was post-apocalyptic. Everything was kind of dusty, and you could tell nobody had been there for a while. The cleaning crews weren't coming in. So it was very much come in, watch the game, and do your Zoom, and then leave. And so there was no kind of dilly-dallying there. It was not, I wouldn't say it was a fun place to be. Look, you could kind of forget for a little while. They piped in the audio, the fake audio, the crowd noise from the video game. And for when the action started, you could forget that things were off, but then you'd look around and just not see the people there. And when the Yankees were on the road, you'd see the cardboard cutouts of the people, and you just say, this is not how baseball is supposed to be played. And so I'm glad it's over, put it that way.
Now, you were not allowed to go on the road, right?
I did take a few trips. So when the Yankees went to Citi Field, I went across town for that one. I was there for opening day in Washington, D.C. I went there. And so there were a lot of people on our beat who did go to most of the road games. So to capture that in this book, I spoke to the beat reporters about their experiences at, say, Fenway Park or at Camden Yards, or during the postseason, that weird alternate site postseason in San Diego. So I got some press box color from that. But personally, I did the games in New York and a handful of games here and there where I could.
So prior to the game, you're in the media room or the press box at the stadium. You're watching the interviews on Zoom. I assume you're able to ask questions. Typically, before a game, would it be Aaron Boone and maybe one player? How would they do that?
I would say the Yankees were very good about that, because especially in a time when we had no access to the players, they were giving us 2 or 3 players pregame every day. And then you'd get the players who were relevant to the game postgame. So if Aaron Judge hit a big home run, you'd get him postgame. You'd always get Boone pregame and postgame. But they gave a good variety of the players, and it wasn't just the same guys every single time. And, in talking to the Yankees PR department about how they were able to pull this season off, I asked the question, did guys ever say no? Did they ever just say, I don't feel like going into the Zoom room today? What they did was they tore down the press conference room and really kind of equipped it with all this high-tech equipment. They had big screen TVs and high definition cameras, and they turned that into their Zoom room, so to speak. And the answer from Yankees PR was that not a single player ever turned down an opportunity to go to the Zoom room. And actually guys wanted to go in there because they were such a tight little unit, which was good for team bonding, but they didn't see anybody outside of that clubhouse the whole day. So it was actually kind of a nice little break for some of these guys to come in and answer questions and see some different faces for 5 minutes or so.
Yeah. Bryan, did you ever run into a player in the parking lot after the game? And if so, did you feel like you could talk to him?
I would say that when the pandemic started and, who knew what we were doing in April, we still went back into our spring training mode, where in the first couple of weeks of spring training, we would all stand on the sidewalk before they allow us into the complex at the spring training site. So we were literally standing on the sidewalk, probably 10 or 15 reporters yelling at guys when they're going to their cars. And I remember asking DJ LeMahieu to come over and talk to us through a chain link fence in a bush. And, Tyler Wade came over one day and Judge stopped his car and we were talking to him through his car window. And that's what we had to do. So that was the coverage in April. But once the players got there back up to New York in July, they've got their own separate entrance there, and security was pretty tight. So I actually did not speak face-to-face with a player again until the 2021 season. So after the team went north for summer camp, everything, all the conversations I was able to do happened over Zoom. I did a lot over telephone for this book because we were just in survival mode and doing what we had to do. But we were very separate from the players and not allowed into their space for obvious reasons.
When you started to talk to players this year, more of an in-face or face-to-face situation, in retrospect, what did they have to say about the 2020 season? Did they think it was surreal, bizarre? Did you get a sense from any of the players? And you certainly don't have to name names, but did you get a sense from any of the players that we just shouldn't be doing this? My heart's not in it. What was the consensus from the ball players?
There were players with mixed feelings about 2020, especially the ones with families and young families who were concerned about that. I had a long conversation with Zach Britton about that, and he talked about having 3 kids at home. His wife was pregnant with a 4th, and knowing that when he got on that plane to leave Texas to report to summer camp, that he was not going to see his family again until the Yankees season was over, whether it be the end of the World Series or if they not make the playoffs or whatever it was going to be. They were not going to see each other. And so I think that was hard for the guys with young families. I think that for a single guy, like, for example, an Aaron Judge, he was talking about how it was okay because they knew, look, they could play by whatever rules it would be for a short period of time. So he talks in the book about, hey, if we're not allowed to chew bubble gum anymore or spit sunflower seeds, which were actually 2 of the rules at that time in 2020, which is crazy to think about in baseball, he said, that's fine. Like, whatever. It's only for 3 months. Lock it down. We won't go out to restaurants. We won't do any of that stuff. Let's get through the season. Let's try to win a World Series. And then you can do the rest of that when you go home for the offseason. So it's kind of hard to remember now that we're a year and a half removed that there was actually a time where ball players were not allowed to have sunflower seeds in the dugout, but it did happen.
Every one of the Yankee players agreed to play last year, but there were a few holdouts across both leagues. Some of the notable names that come to mind, Buster Posey, Ian Desmond, there were a few others as well. Any reaction from any of the Yankee players about those decisions not to play at all?
They supported it. I think they understood. I mean, this was a once in a century pandemic and nobody really had the answers here. I think that, what I talked to about the players on the Yankees was the consensus was, and they took a vote about it, they wanted to play. The ball players want to play, and it's what they set their clock to. Their entire career is built around knowing you're going to be on the field from Valentine's Day until Halloween, possibly. And so when that was taken away from them and they were limited in a lot of ways to just taking batting practice and scrambling to find workout facilities, what they wanted to do was get back together as a team. And so they did that in July. They had the summer camp and then actually playing that opening day game in DC. It was a rain shortened game. But I thought that was important for the nation and for the sport to just show that we were resilient. We were getting back on the field. We were going on with life, and that even in this strange pandemic environment, baseball would continue.
We continue with Bryan Hoch, longtime Yankee beat writer, has written the excellent book, The Bronx Zoom, Inside the New York Yankees' Most Bizarre Season. It has been nominated for the Casey Award, news that came down last week. Bryan, wanted to talk about some of the things that went on off the field. You've got issues like Black Lives Matter, protests around the country. You've got the presidential election, which of course persisted well into November and in some ways even beyond that. Did you talk to the players about these issues? Were these questions brought up by any of the writers during these Zoom sessions?
I did. Yeah, that was, you couldn't avoid the topic. And, as I said earlier, I felt that politics a lot of times is something you steer away from in the clubhouse. You want to say baseball only, and whether you're left or right, whatever it is, doesn't matter. I'm more interested in if you're a left fielder or a right fielder. You know what I mean? But I think that it was unavoidable, and you saw the protests. You saw how the incident in Seattle affected the players, the incidents in Minnesota, what was going on in Kenosha, that continued to seep into the baseball world. And there was that game where the Mets and the Marlins decided to walk off the field at Citi Field, and they just left the Black Lives Matter T-shirt on home plate. I mean, these were striking images that you literally had teams refusing to play because of what was going on, the social unrest and the inequality in the country. And so you had some powerful statements here, and that prompted Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Hicks, two of the players on the Yankees, to take a knee during the national anthem. And this is something that we've never seen before, and not in the New York Yankees universe. They were the first Yankees to kneel for the national anthem. And, I talked with Hal Steinbrenner after the season for this book, and Hal said that, look, his preference would have been that the players didn't do that, but he understood that they felt the need to make a statement. And in that regard, the Yankees were supportive that because Stanton and Hicks felt so strongly about that, they brought it up in a team meeting. And we have details from the team meeting in the book. And just speaking to the guys who were there, they were passionate about it. This was not something that they were doing willy-nilly. I mean, there was a lot of thought and conversation that went into these gestures. They knew there was going to be pushback, and the Yankees, as I'm sure the other teams did, received a lot of negative feedback after that. But the organization supported it because they knew how important it was in the grander scheme of what was going on in social justice and in the world in 2020.
I'm curious, Bryan, were there any awkward exchanges? For example, this past year, there was a situation where some reporters directly asked Aaron Judge if he'd been vaccinated or not. And he was polite about it, but he did not want to offer a direct response to that, which I can certainly understand. Did you have situations where reporters are asking players, well, who are you going to vote for? What's your political affiliation? Did any of that go on? And how awkward was that?
I think that it was something that was unavoidable. We certainly didn't do that on the Zoom there, but it was a discussion in every workplace environment in the world. I mean, there's a part of the book there where then President Trump was so upset about the fact that they had Anthony Fauci throw the first pitch that he said, well, that's it. I'm coming to Yankee Stadium. I'm going to throw it for a Red Sox Yankee game. And that completely caught the Yankees off guard. They didn't know about that at all. And they had to kind of backtrack 4 or 5 days later and say, whoa. We didn't say you could come to Yankee Stadium here. And it wound up not happening. But again, politics and baseball just kept meeting each other there during that season. No matter if you wanted to try and keep it separate, you just couldn't, because in all ways of American life, that was happening. You had, I talked to Brian Cashman about this, and I did ask him that question. Did you ever have in the clubhouse, was that happening? The Trump debate versus the Biden debate. And he said it happened everywhere. You couldn't avoid it. Guys were talking about it, and guys had strong opinions on both sides. And I think that both sides were certainly represented in that Yankee clubhouse. And, I didn't get too into the nitty gritty of, hey, did you vote for this guy or for that guy? But I think that by their actions, you could tell a lot of ways which way players leaned.
Were there any players on the Yankees who made it clear to the media, I don't want to talk about any of that? You want to ask me about baseball? Fine, I'll give you an answer. But I don't want to talk about politics, racial issues. I just don't want to get into it. Anybody give you that reaction?
Yeah, there were certainly guys who were more comfortable discussing it than others. And, obviously that's what they're trained to do. They go through media training every single year where they're kind of taught to steer the conversation toward baseball. Jason Zillo, the Yankees director of media relations, runs that, and it goes for several days. And they're there to talk about baseball. And now you always have the option to discuss things that are going on outside the realm. But I think that some players are more comfortable with that than others. And what I would say is that Giancarlo Stanton really impressed me last year in his willingness to take a stand and to discuss it, to defend it, to articulate what he was feeling and why. And I think that in terms of, if we want to go into the Zoom room, he was one of the MVPs of last season. Obviously, he had a fantastic postseason. He was MVP caliber player on the field as well for stretches of that year. But just in terms of discussing what he was feeling, what the players were feeling, the sentiment in that clubhouse, I felt like he was very open with that. And, with Stanton and a few other guys willing to do that, it relaxed the need for other players or for all the players on that team to discuss those issues if they didn't feel comfortable doing so.
Ryan, kind of a strange thought just popped into my mind as you were speaking there. What if the Yankees of 1977 were the Yankees of last year? Now, those guys were volatile as it was. Throw politics, race into the issue, into the situation. There would have been fights every day with those Yankees. The Munsons, the Nettles, the Rivers, the Jack. These were not guys who held back their opinions on anything.
No, yeah. I can't imagine what it would have been like to cover that team in a 2020 type environment where, I felt that in talking to the players, the pandemic actually bonded them as a unit in a lot of ways. It was kind of like, we're all thrown into this mix together, the 26 of us. There's nobody else we can really lean on here. It's just everybody who's in this clubhouse. There's no media coming in to disrupt things. There's no, in a lot of cases, they don't have family to go home to because they kept their family at home and didn't bring them to New York, which was still struggling in the aftermath of the worst days of pandemic. And so, a completely different team for sure. But I think that the 2020 Yankees bonded over the challenges that they faced, as I'm sure a lot of other teams did around the majors. I think it's the kind of thing where it's either going to make you or break you, and you sink or float given those challenges. But let's not forget there is racial strife and there is problems in 1977 as well. The one parallel I would draw between there, I believe that one of those years, whether it's 77 or 78, there's a big newspaper strike, and that actually helps the Yankees get back into the race. I think it's 78. Because for about a month there, the newspaper reporters aren't allowed in the clubhouse because they're not working anymore. And so the team was able to actually just kind of focus on baseball and get back in the race and make up that 14-game gap on the Red Sox. So maybe there's a good parallel there between 78 and 2020.
No, you're absolutely right. The strike, without question. I was somebody who lived through, I was young at the time. Yeah. I was, an avid Yankee fan, followed the team very closely. There's no question that they started playing better once the strike began. Then you go back to the 77 season, and one of the issues going on off the field, the Son of Sam murders. That was right. Something that also intermixed, maybe not as extensively into the ballpark as some of the current day issues have, but certainly something that people were aware of. ESPN did that terrific series a few years ago, The Bronx Is Burning, and they showed how these two worlds, the world of a serial killer and how it affected everything. And it affected even the relatively peaceful world of baseball. Bryan,
And
let's
I'm
talk
glad you
about.
mentioned that because I'm sorry, Bruce. Sorry to
Go right
interrupt. I'm
ahead.
glad you mentioned that because I do want to give credit to that terrific book that Jonathan Mahler wrote, "The Bronx Is Burning," because that was one of the kind of concepts front of mind for me in doing this book. Is that book has New York City politics, it has what's going on with Son of Sam, and it has the New York Yankees kind of layered one on top of the other, and that was kind of what I did in terms of pitching this book and kind of formulating in my mind. Because if you just do one of those pieces, I feel like all the pieces of the puzzle have to fit together.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's talk about the postseason last year, Bryan. Did you get any additional access to the ballpark?
There was no additional access, but you had the same access, and the Yankees were very good about providing the Zooms, as I said, and you could get in there probably. You could watch batting practice and stuff. The one thing that I would say about the postseason was you actually had people back in the ballpark. And that's what we're talking about in the book there. The Yankees go to Cleveland and they can actually have their wives and family members come. They had to stay in a luxury suite high above the right field porch there. But I talked to a few of the wives for what that was like to actually get to see their husbands and the significant others play ball again after so many months of being limited to seeing it on TV. And so it was emotional in a lot of ways for them, and to just be able to cheer. And Garrett Cole talks about that was his son's first game, was the playoff game he played, the wild card game against the Indians in Cleveland. He had a newborn son at the time, and they brought him to the ballpark. And then the players go to San Diego for that wild American League Division Series against the Rays. And of course it was the Rays, because the Yankees and Rays had such bad blood the entire year going back to 2019. And then they've got to live in the same hotel. Major League Baseball, in their infinite wisdom, came up with the idea that it would be safer to keep both of these teams under the same roof in the hotel. And these are two teams that did not like each other one bit. And so fortunately, the hotel was smart enough to put the Rays in one wing of the hotel and the Yankees in the other. And so you didn't have a situation where Mike Brasso and Aroldis Chapman got in the same elevator. That didn't happen, but they did pass each other on their way to get breakfast and stuff. And it was mostly cordial, I think, but they saved their fireworks for the field because these teams did not like each other, and they still don't.
Yeah. Did you get to go to first Cleveland and then Tampa Bay?
No, unfortunately, we weren't traveling for the postseason. I wish I had gone to Cleveland and San Diego. I wish I'd experienced that, but I did interviews with as many people as I could find who were there. I spoke to not only the Yankees beat reporters, but also the Cleveland beat reporters, the Rays beat reporters. I tried to get a full perspective of what was happening all the way through up until the final pitch of the Yankee season.
That's right. The games were not in Tampa. I've forgotten.
They had the neutral site in San Diego.
Neutral site. Yeah. What a strange situation. Looking back at that postseason series against Tampa Bay, it was obviously disappointing for Yankee fans. The Rays ended up going to the World Series. Terrific team. They came within 2 games of winning the World Series against the Dodgers themselves. In talking to the players, the Yankee players, about their postseason performance, did any of them feel that the pandemic had an effect on the outcome there, that there was maybe the mental wear and tear, the mental stress, or did they view that as simply as an excuse?
Well, I think there's 2 different questions there. They were obviously disappointed and angry in a lot of ways. I mean, I talked to Garrett Cole probably about a month after the final game there, and he was still angry. It came through the phone. You could tell he was still pissed that the Yankees did not win the World Series, and he thought they had a team good enough to go all the way, and they ran into a Rays team that outplayed them and deserved it. But I think that talking to so many of these players, they were just exhausted by the end of the year, more so than a 162 would have taken out of them. I think the stress and anxiety and uncertainty of 2020, just beginning in March and then having everything shut down and not knowing when you're going to get back on the field. And for some of the younger players, not having paychecks coming in until games started again. I think that was a part of it too. It added stress to that. And then having to think about, are things going to restart in Tampa? Oh, no, it's going to be in New York. Let's hurry up. Let's get to New York. Let's go through this abbreviated spring training. Let's get on the field in 3 weeks and start playing these games and flying and traveling around to playing these empty ballpark games. There was a ton going on. And then you throw into the other layers that we're talking about with social justice and the presidential election. And there was just every day was you open up your email and wonder, what is going to happen next? And you've got teammates testing positive and disappearing, and then guys coming back in, and rosters around the league just changing. And there was so much going on that I think when the season ended and these guys finally got home, they collapsed into their couches for about a week and didn't move. And in a lot of cases, I remember Luke Voigt telling me that he was spent by the end of the year, and it really took a while to kind of get back into the swing of things.
Now, did you get to go to the World Series at all?
I didn't go to the World Series last year. No, in 2020, MLB didn't travel us, so we were home for the postseason. But I did cover the postseason this year, and it was such a great difference to have fans back. And I know the fans were there for the World Series. They played them in Texas there in 2020, and watching that on television, I can tell you, I was still a little gun shy about that because just seeing fans back in, I wasn't quite ready for that yet. And when spring training started in 2021, there were very limited amounts of fans there. And that was kind of a toe back in the water. I think they started with about 1,000 fans at Steinbrenner Field. And it was kind of like, okay, we're fine here. We can keep doing this. And then vaccinations happen. And then you just get, an explosion of people coming back in, and it goes from 10,000 to 30,000 to 40,000. And then it started to feel normal again.
In looking back at the 2020 season, we know there are a number of players who don't necessarily enjoy interacting with the media. Nothing personal against you, but a lot of them would rather not have to have that responsibility before and after games. So maybe they didn't miss that. But the sense that I got talking to Jason Stark, among others, was that players really did miss having the fans at the game. And I guess I was a little surprised by that, because I had sort of taken the approach that players try to tune the fans out. They try not to pay attention to the fans, sometimes to the point where it's maybe not fair to the fans. The fans are not made to feel welcome. But the sense I got talking to Jason and a few other people as well, the players really did miss having the fans at the ballpark. You agree?
Absolutely. No question about it. I think that if you think about the career paths that these guys have had since their first days in Little League, you've got people in the stands cheering for them, clapping, reacting to the game. And then suddenly they're all gone and there's nobody there, and it's just you on the field. And I think that for a lot of these guys, it was a challenge to motivate themselves, to get fired up for a game, because, talking to these guys, they would talk about how, your body's aching. You've played 7 or 8 games in a row. You got to get on the field. It's a day game after a night game or whatever it is. You get out there and you see the packed stands. It gives you a little adrenaline boost. And you say, okay, let's go perform for these people. Let's put on a show. When these people aren't there, who are you putting the show on for? And so you really had to dig deep within themselves to find that extra level, which the fans do provide. And there's a reason we talk about the fans being the 10th man on the field. It really does make a difference. And not having them there, I think definitely you could tell something was missing. And I think that the players probably didn't fully appreciate that until this past year, until last year, when they had to experience it.
We still have a few minutes remaining with Bryan Hoch, a Yankee beat writer, who has written a new book, The Bronx Zoom, and nominated for this year's Casey Award. We would like to take questions that you might have for Bryan. And if you want to post those questions, just go to the Zoom group chat. You can type the questions out there, and we'll do our best to get to those. In fact, our first question coming in from Steve actually wants to go a little bit away from our main topic of conversation. I guess we can get into this a little bit, but recently announced Hall of Fame balloting, the ballots going out this week. You're a member of the Baseball Writers Association of America. I assume that you do vote in the election. Have you placed any votes at this point, or are you still thinking about it?
I actually am not yet eligible to vote because they did not allow the internet writers in until about 7 years ago. So I'm still on that 10-year waiting. They didn't give us retroactive credit, unfortunately. So I'm certainly aware of the ballot. I'm keeping an eye on it, but I think I've got about 2 more years to wait until I can cast my first vote.
Because you've been following baseball since at least 07, right?
My first year was 2007, but they did not put the internet writers in until I think 2013 or so. So I'm getting a late start here on my 10-year wait. But once I get in, then I'll file that ballot every year.
I'm curious how you're looking forward to that. I've talked to some writers. They're very honored. They feel it's a real privilege to be able to vote. I've talked to other writers who say they actually maybe think it's a conflict of interest. They're not, they do vote, but they're not as passionate about it. Your view?
I think it's a tremendous honor. It's, one of the real perks of being in the Baseball Writers Association of America. I think it's a tremendous privilege, and take it very seriously, the fact to contribute to that great museum you've got up there, and just to be acknowledged as one of the people who have input in that decision. I think that's staggering. And it's certainly something that if you told 12-year-old me that I would one day get a say in who goes to the Hall of Fame and who doesn't, that's a dream. And so it's something that I plan to take very seriously and to spend a lot of time going over that ballot. That ballot is not the kind of thing that you just get in the mail, check off, and send right back. I think there's a lot of research and thought that needs to go into it. And those players, everybody who was on that ballot had a career in the major leagues that is worthy of looking at. And, some of those guys, perhaps maybe you consider more strongly than others, but I think every single one of them deserves some very thoughtful consideration, because it is a great achievement just to be on that ballot.
Absolutely. That's not talked about enough. Just the fact that you've made a Hall of Fame ballot is an accomplishment. There's generally 30 to 35 names a year. Not every player who has played a minimum of 10 seasons, been retired for 5, goes onto the ballot. There is a screening committee, and some pretty good players have gotten weeded out, have not even made it to the ballot. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Question comes in from Martin. Do you think the 2022 season will start on time? Of course, we have the looming lockout that some people think is inevitable. Maybe, maybe not.
I think that we will probably have a pause here, but I do believe that the season will get started on time. I think there's too much at stake here for these two sides not to come together. Maybe you wind up having a delayed start to spring training, but I think that, look, I'll put it to you this way. The Yankees are scheduled to open the season on March 31 in Texas. I'm planning on being there. And so I think that we get started on time. I think that the offseason, you're going to see some headlines here that are not going to be very pretty. They're going to go back and forth. That is the nature of negotiations. And, I get into it in that book a little bit about what was going on off the field between MLB and the Players Association. I think you're going to have that even more ramped up this offseason, but these sides got to figure it out. So I expect that March 31, baseball will start.
Martin also had a second question. I'm not exactly sure to how to interpret it, but I want to give it to you anyway. He wants to know, do you think the COVID pandemic is a major reason or a reason that the lockdown may happen? In other words, I think what Martin's getting at, is there any correlation between what's happened the last couple of years with the pandemic and the possibility that we might have a work stoppage? Do you see any connection at all?
I would say the connection is probably that the players wanted to play more than 60 games in 2020. And this would be a minor issue, I think, compared to the other things that are on the table there. But it's not forgotten for sure that the players wanted to play more than the 60 games, and that the owners did not want to pay for players to play in empty ballparks for more than 60 games. So that is why we got that number in 2020. And I'm sure that that is a small part of it, but I think that there are so many other issues that's further down the list here.
Question from a friend of ours here at the Hall of Fame, Rob Pendell. He wants to know, do players experience team versus team rivalries in the way that fans do? In other words, do players still hate opponents as maybe they once did?
Yeah, I think they do. And we talk about it. We just talked about how the Yankees and Rays did not like each other. There was a lot of bad blood between those teams, especially when Aroldis Chapman threw a fastball over Mike Brasso's head. And I remember Kevin Cash coming on and, threatening that he had a whole damn stable of guys in that bullpen who could throw 97 miles an hour and that the Yankees better watch out. And I don't think that was just talk. So I think that when you get in those division rivalries, especially these teams that go head to head 19 times every year, you're going to have players who don't like each other. And a lot of times you see there's fraternization going on. They talk behind the batting cage. Guys will chat at first base. Maybe it's not the way it was in the 70s or before that, but I still think that there are teams in this league that do not like each other. And I've experienced it firsthand covering the Yankees. I see it when they bump up against the Red Sox or the Rays, that it definitely is still there. Those passions go hot because these teams are playing for a lot and they're fighting for the same thing.
I've had a few Yankee fans ask me or tell me, you've got to ask Bryan, what's the outlook for this winter? Going to be a lot of changes? Is Cashman going to clean house? What's your gut feeling?
My gut feeling is, look, number one priority for the Yankees is a shortstop. And I was actually with Cashman a week ago. He did his event in New York City. We were on a rooftop in Manhattan where he kind of slept out. And he said that shortstop above all, everything else is the priority. So obviously this is one of the most stacked shortstop markets I can ever remember. You've got Carlos Correa and Trevor Story and Marcus Semien and Javier Baez. And my personal prediction, Corey Seager is the guy that I think the Yankees are going to wind up with. I know that there are some stories going out there about how the Yankees don't want to spend big for a shortstop and they're looking for more of a stopgap solution. I'm not buying that completely. I think the Yankees have talked about how they've got money coming off the payroll here. They see the payroll going higher. I think that they've reset the luxury tax. The Yankees are primed to spend here. They play in New York City. It's been too long since a World Series championship or a World Series appearance for the New York Yankees. I think that they spend big on a shortstop, and Corey Seager being a lefty who could possibly move to third base, I think he makes a ton of sense for this team.
Final question for me for Bryan, and I was told this was very important to bring up. One of your daughters has become an absolute internet sensation. I've talked to several people who have seen the videos that she puts together, I assume with some help from you. I've seen a couple of them myself. They're very cute. They're very funny. Tell us about that.
Penny's 2 cents. Actually, very little help from me. This is all Connie again. Mrs. Hoch is really bringing the goods on that one. And that started during the pandemic shutdown. And actually, we talked earlier about how I was living separately from them for safety reasons during the pandemic. Well, she kept asking, where's Daddy? What's Daddy doing? Daddy's at the ballpark right now. So this was actually kind of her introduction to baseball and the Yankees. It really kind of increased her interest in the sport. And so she said, I want to make some videos the way Daddy does. And so, I do my little post-game stand-ups at the ballpark and stuff, and we put them online. She wanted to do her own version of that. And so when you've got a 4-year-old passionately talking about the upcoming series against the Red Sox or the Rays or whatever it is and reacting in real time to what's happening, Aaron Judge is your favorite player. And so I think that in a year where there was so much darkness and so much negative news, to have just a 4-year-old, now she's 5, really showing her excitement and energy and being thrilled that baseball is back, I think it's what people wanted or needed in a lot of ways. And I certainly didn't expect it to be a series. They sent it to me. They sent me one video and I said, that's cute. Can I put it on Twitter? And I posted it and people said, we need more Penny. And so that is how it started in 2020 and it continued through 2021. And somebody even put her face on a t-shirt, which is just blows my mind that people connected with it that much, but it's great.
Perhaps a future theatrical performer or actress. How about your other daughter, Maddie? Is she getting involved in this at all?
She's getting involved. Yeah, she loves playing baseball. She might be our ball player. And so,
okay.
It's amazing to see how the hand-eye coordination develops. And she is definitely very active and, she'll make guest appearances once in a while on the videos, but I think she is going to be more interested in being a varsity athlete at one point in her life, a few years down the road.
Yeah. All right. So look for more from Penny and Maddie Hoch. Remember those names. We also want to remember Bryan Hoch for being with us. Want to thank him for being with us over this past hour. Author of the Bronx Zoom. Again, the book has been nominated for the Casey Award. I don't know exactly when that announcement will be made. I would hope sometime between now and the end of the year. Would seem to make sense. One of 9 finalists for the Casey Award. Again, it's the Bronx Zoom inside the New York Yankees' most bizarre season, published by Triumph Books. And you can find it at Bryan's website, which is Bryan, BRYAN Hoch, that's HOCH.com, Bryan-Hoch.com. Bryan, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, Bruce. Anytime. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for everybody out there watching.
It's been a lot of fun, Bryan. We've really enjoyed it. And hopefully we'll have a winter full of hot stove talk and not so much labor strife. We'll all
absolutely. I'm all in on that. That sounds really good to me.
We'll keep our fingers crossed. In the meantime, we thank the Ford Motor Company for being the sponsor for this event. We thank Bryan Hoch once again, and we thank all of you for viewing and participating. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.